Tuesday in class, I started to pull up a, um, whatever you want to call this, a genealogy or family chart to explain some things, and I didn't have the right one. So I've got this one that I downloaded, and I've marked the people that we're tracking, but other people that we are aware of or have talked about. Okay, and then these people over here. Okay, so Philip the Fourth, the guy who took down the Templars. Okay, um, and then his daughter Isabella, who married Edward II, and then ended up taking over England effectively for a while, supposedly as a regent for her son, and then was overthrown. So we've looked at them. And Edward III is our very strong king who had all of the kids, and most of them are here. And then you'll see we have 2 of 7 sons and 1 of 5 daughters died young. So there were more kids than are showing here. Lots and lots and lots of kids. Okay, and he reigned for 50 years. He was a really strong king. Okay, so down here we mentioned the other day Edward the Black Prince here. He will live long enough to father a son, although he married very late for the era he married, didn't marry until like 31, and then died like 2 years later. So he will only have this one child. I'm going to explain who these people are, and then we will come back to them as they, rather than flipping back and forth because the Zoom makes it hard. And then he is going to also be considered a horrible, horrible king who will be overthrown effectively or deposed by this guy, Henry IV, over here. He will have one child who will become king and is very famous. That is Henry V. And we will look at him. He's very famous. He gets his own play for Shakespeare. It was a big deal. It's been made into movies. He too will die young, leaving a baby king. All right, will be this guy who we will look at when we get to the wars. Some of this we won't be looking at until we get to the Wars of the Roses. All right, but this kid's gonna grow up and marry this French prince, another French princess, although not an heir to the French throne. Anjou was a little separate at that point, so marry her. But this is Wars of the Roses stuff in here, which is why I'm not going to do it all today. But there's going to be Edwards and Richards and God knows Henrys going forward. So, but the people we've been tracking are, Edward III, and he is the king in the movie who loses his daughter, not the movie, the plague video, who loses his beloved Joan. He really did love most of his kids. So he loses her. But this is the son that was supposed to inherit, who will die of, I think, dysentery. And this baby will grow up while the wars are still going on, basically. So I hope having it laid out like this helps make a little more sense. The inheritance issue, we have Isabella married Edward II over here. So some would say again that this guy should have been the heir to this throne. Okay, so that's where you get your contest over the thrones. But the contest over the thrones was really an excuse to have a war for economic gain, basically. Okay. All right. Now I need to stop share. Okay. All right, so we did a little bit of this the other day. The English strategy was basically just wear them down. We talked about chevauchée and how this really is strategic planning, it's basically strategic bombing. You're destroying the ability to make war. So in this case, you're going after civilians, and you are doing it very deliberately. And doing this kind of thing in the 1300s, and then it will move into the 1400s. But in the 1300s, where you already have the chaos of the Great Schism going on, and then you add the plague in the middle of it, just devastating. Okay, just absolutely devastating. So an image, like I said, of Edward the Black Prince. Yeah, he really wasn't a very nice guy. He seemed to enjoy the chevauchées maybe a little too much. So that certainly, as well as, using a black enameled armor and shield, or at least shield, went with his reputation. he will still be considered a great knight in the sense of his prowess and his skill and all those sorts of things. But this idea, what he and the people following him will do are going to absolutely lead to the downfall of the knighthood. So that wasn't super good thinking. And yes, his death will cause major inheritance issues. All right. So talked about this. English do well that using chevauchée will backfire. Now, I won't go back to the tree to trace how we get to this guy, but we get to this guy. We'll look at it again later. Henry V, the most famous probably of these kings in our modern era. The only one I'm aware of got like a Kenneth Branagh movie. This is not at all what Kenneth Branagh looked like in the movie. Yes, hi, kitten. Now, he is going to spend most of his time, a great deal of his time anyway, in France fighting the war. And he is also going to put off marrying, which you'd think these guys would stop doing that. There's Kenneth Branagh as Henry V. But he is going to resume the war with France, and he's going to be he's going to get a lot of acclaim for, shoring up England's claim, taking new lands. This Battle of Agincourt, which I'll talk about in a second, really was an enormous victory for England, even though some of it's being reevaluated by modern historians. And after this battle, he's going to sign the Treaty of Troyes, which is going to be able to get King Charles of Valois' daughter, Catherine, for his wife. So he is going to be the one that really gets he gets the closest of all of them to actually taking and truly conquering France, much more so than any of the others. But he is going to suffer a sudden and unexpected death. Some say dysentery, some say a septic wound. A few, there's various sorts of theories as to why he died, because he was a pretty robustly healthy guy. Some of these people, you can see illnesses in them younger from the sources, but he was pretty robustly healthy. So he will end up leaving behind an infant son under a regency, and that is going to cause all kinds of problems back home in England, which we will look at under the Wars of the Roses. All right. Now, this battle has always been considered, it's a part of the English psyche in the way that the Revolutionary War is a part of our psyche. Like this was an amazing thing that we did, and it was fantastic, and it makes us so cool, and all the kind of mythology that attaches for the English, it is Agincourt. There was yes, they did defeat a much larger mounted force, and I'll show you a little bit how in a second. Lots of modern scholars, not lots, a set of modern scholars have, however, gone back and reevaluated some of these sources, being a little more critical about how they are looking at the numbers presented, which actually goes with a larger controversy that's going on in the field of history, which is how do you interpret numbers in these, either outright ancient, like Alexander or Rome, or less outright ancient, but still very old sources? How do you interpret these numbers if you don't have lists of inventory or X number of swords ordered for battle? We very rarely, after Rome, have that kind of information. So it is, it's like, how do we take this? It is still an amazing battle. The English may not have been as outnumbered as was always claimed. Okay. So this became a very famous speech, of course, from the Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is part of the problem with the interpretations, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But this says the St. Crispin's Day speech. It's the morning before the battle. They're outnumbered. They're basically expecting to die. All right, from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. Where we get that saying. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. be he ne'er so vile. Basically, even if he's, was born in a, peasant. And there's more. And if I don't run out of time, I will, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I will show you. One of my favorite actors, Tom Hiddleston, does a great rendition of the speech. Okay, so this is just a layout, and this kind of stuff is still studied today. And I talked a little bit about this the other day about what you do, like what are the Ukrainians doing? If you're outnumbered or you are outgunned, as we would say, you use the terrain. You use your terrain. So he managed to maneuver the French into attacking from this, like where they were narrowed down into this valley. So they couldn't come around and say flank the English. He also managed to be uphill. Note the way this kind of comes down like that. The English are at the top of the hill. So they are able to rush downward, and have physics on their side rather than against them. The French are still, even 50 years into this thing, tending to be more heavily armored, which is going to be a problem on uneven ground or muddy ground or in bad weather. They're still hanging on to, now we're into 1415. So an ideal of fighting that's 100 years old, and it's still working against them. Okay. And yes, Henry again has the English longbowmen, and they're doing what they did all the way back at Crusade. All right, so in a way, it's a repeat of that, and they only had, even the French really only had a little bit of cavalry, even, which was crazy. I mean, at least have that. It was a resounding, battle. So the victory was near total. The French defeat was catastrophic. About 40%, literally, of the French nobility was killed. Like, bye-bye. Concerned that large numbers of prisoners taken were a security risk. There were more French prisoners from that battle than the entire English army. Henry ordered them killed. Now, not only is that shocking, that's the kind of thing people did in the Middle East. They didn't, to people from the Middle East. They didn't do it to, in Europe to each other. So that was considered like shocking. It also pissed off a lot of his soldiers because they were hoping to get ransoms from some of those prisoners. So it's going to take a couple of years to work out the peace, but they'll get this Treaty of Troyes. He will marry a French princess named Catherine, who we will look at, and their heirs. Basically, it was like the agreement was, I, Henry V, will not sit on the French throne, but my sons will. Okay, so that was oops, I see a hand. That was sort of the plan. Yeah, go ahead, Bryce.
How many hold on. Why were so many French nobility involved with this fight?
That was their job.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's basically their job. I mean, that was, being a defense force was the justification for the entire knightly structure. And the nobles most of them are still at this point knights, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
That's what. Okay. All right. Anything else? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, some of this is going to have some non-war. War always brings changes and innovations and different ways of doing things. In England, this stuff brings, this is going to be the first time since the Norman conquest, so almost 400 years almost, where the nobles and the royalty are going to pretty much start only speaking English. Okay, that's a first. They've been bilingual most for the last couple hundred years. But some of them still only spoke French because that's what the Normans spoke. But you're going to even have it become the official, like this Chancery Standard English and things. It's going to become the language of the court. That is Like that's a huge sign of we are creating our own identity. We are not just basically Frenchmen who went over to England the way the Normans kind of were. They're really creating a sense of Englishness here. Um, so you will have, yeah, first king to use English in personal correspondence sit for in 350 years. Right now, Edward the third had already helped. You'd had Edward the First basically allow the growth of what will become to be called the House of Lords. His grandson, Edward the Third, is going to allow the first signs of what will come to be called the House of Commons. And so even within like 2 generations, you're starting to get more of a less and less of basically a feudal system and more of a national bureaucracy. It isn't there yet, but it's the seeds of it. And all of these things play into that. Wait, is that? Finally, we get to the point where we get to talk about Joan of Arc. It's like, because this thing is so long. All right. So Joan of Arc was, and she's somebody that's still interesting to us today for so many reasons. Hey, she was a woman. You don't see that. You don't see a woman becoming famous in wartime for war things very often. So that is number one. Number two is she's a commoner. Now, she's not a peasant. Well, technically she's a peasant. Legally, she's a peasant. She's not a serf. She's not desperately poor. Her family was relatively, I mean, compared to the other peasants, relatively well off and kind of important in the area that she came from in the sense of being like like her dad was an alderman. So not the lowest of the low. Okay, but still not a noble, not landed gentry, no knighthoods or anything in her family. All right. Now, along with, like I said, along with you have this, you've been at war for I don't know how many years now, and then you've had the Black Death. I mean, the countryside is devastated. The economy is devastated. Social classes are in an uproar. The nobles are being killed off. It's just a hot mess in France. Okay. So she had these the visions that she said she had, these religious visions from God, began at about age 12. And at age 16 she went to the garrison guards near where she was, and basically asked for, and I think the king was traveling, asked permission to like give a warning or give advice. And of course you're like, go away, peasant chick. So whatever. Then she's going to come back the following year, and she's going to make a prediction based on her visions of a military reversal. And when it happens, people are going to go, wait, maybe we should listen to this chick. Okay, they didn't say chick, but you get what I'm saying. Maybe we should be listening to her, because how could else, unless these religious visions really were real, how else could she know, basically? Okay. So, the extent of her leadership, actual leadership, like as a military leader, when she kind of gets accepted into the French leadership circles, the extent of that is debated. How much was it that she actually got to lead troops in battle, and how much was it that she was basically a mascot? Okay, we don't know. Just being a mascot as a woman is still astounding. No, but we don't know on that. So, okay, she was very often a standard bearer, and they're actually showing that here. She's bearing the standard. In wars up until the 20th century, and if you've heard me cover the Civil War, I've talked about it, being the standard bearer is actually a really dangerous position, because you're carrying around a thing that gives the enemy something to aim at. It makes you easier to find or easier to hit once we're actually using cannon and things like that. So that wasn't like to keep her safe. that was definitely for morale that they did that. Some recent scholarship is saying that she was giving good strategic or tactical advice. So there's a lot of we don't know. And the fact that this was all wrapped up in religion, and most of the original sources that were positive tended to be religious sources rather than political sources, makes it kind of hard to know you're really in the way. Okay. Oh, kitten, excuse me. Sorry. So some other things. Do I have more? Yeah. Okay. So Joan of Arc has been a really popular source for movies for a long time. So this is from like the 19 or maybe early 1960s. And this is the OOs at some point. What's going to happen is this is all going to get caught up in politics, basically. There were other groups that were, as happens when a country is in chaos, the way France is in chaos, there are other groups that are going to get involved. And one of the other groups, and we're back to the enemy of my friend is my friend. Is it on this map? Yeah. Okay. This right here, Duchy of Burgundy, County of Burgundy. This is a thing. Okay. These people, in order to hopefully ever, gain control of Flanders, will ally with England. All right. They will often be allied with England, but not always. And so you get this alliance that, well, basically made things a lot more vulnerable. I mean, at this time, so by 1430, after the Siege of Orleans, the English holdings are a lot smaller than they were, and the French holdings are a lot bigger, but you've also got these people, they're allied with England, and England has some stuff down here. I mean, which kind of envelops parts of France. That's kind of a dangerous place to be. So you have the Burgundians basically manage to capture her, okay, and effectively sell her to their English allies. The English didn't catch her. The Burgundians caught her. And basically, like, it was like a political deal. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to basically put her on trial for some technicalities. All right. It was illegal to cross-dress. So obviously she's being portrayed here in armor, and this is from the 1800s, but this is from the 15th century. So that's from the 1400s. So this is in the century she lived. All right. She probably was dressed as, I doubt she was wearing plate anywhere. She was probably wearing like a chainmail shirt with leather and pants, but it was illegal to cross dress. This was not the only, these are called sumptuary laws, and I'll talk more about them later, but that, like, you were supposed to dress like the class that you were in, basically. We'll look at that. And gender swapping of any kind was, of course, never ever allowed. Now, when she traveled, she cut off her hair and traveled as a page, a young knightly or close to, like there were squires and pages. Those were the two avenues for the landed gentry and noble children to sort of play a part in things. So she traveled as a page. They were often used as messengers, things like that. That's just smart, because in this kind of chaos, a woman traveling alone, really bad idea. So traveling as a page was a super smart way. Plus, it was hard to ride astride with skirts. You could do it, and there were split skirts that some people would use, but you weren't really supposed to. So there were some practical reasons for dressing. She was less trying to dress as a man than just like get stuff done, basically. But it was illegal, and it was against canon law to do it. Okay. It's like you're telling God, I don't want the role you put me in. So it's against canon law. All right. So captured by the Burgundians, who basically sell, if they would sell, give her to the English to put on trial by the pro-English Bishop of Beauvais, because yes, you have nobles all over France picking sides, and it's often the side that is going to give them, as an individual, the most advantage. So a French but pro-English bishop on a variety of charges, all of which basically amount to heresy. They were calling the visions witchcraft, even though they were, she absolutely always stuck by the fact that these were like visions from God or visions from the angels or visions from Jesus. And yeah, and it basically, even at the time, everybody knew this was BS. Like everyone knew that this was political. Every single person involved knew this was political, including her. Let's see. I'm gonna actually have notes on this. Okay. She was 19 years old. She will actually be put on trial and burned for heresy. I don't know if she was given the cord. Giving the cord is where someone goes in and quickly, like, basically strangles you real fast so you don't actually burn. I think can't remember if I mentioned that or not in the past. And I don't know with her. Probably not, because it was all a political, it was a political show. Within 25 years, an Inquisition court, it's an Inquisition court, re-looked at all the evidence and said, no, she was innocent. She was actually a martyr. And so she won't be canonized as a saint until the 20th century. Now, her visions are one of those things that, like we tend to look at these things and say, this is a form of like mental illness. Like maybe, some of the theories are schizophrenic. Some more modern theories are bipolar, like a severe version of bipolar 1. The problem with both of those is you can't, if you have those things to the point where you are hearing voices, which is possible, you are affected by it. Like, it isn't just in one little area that you hear these voices. Your whole life is affected by this, and you are clearly not okay. It's not like you're fine when you're at work and then you go home and it all goes crazy. Like, you can't hold down a job if it's that severe. And she did ride with the king of, at that time, king of France, and he did listen to her. And his dad had been batshit crazy. Like I said, eating on the floor with the dogs. He knew what crazy looked like. And there's no way he would have been listening to someone and taking advice from someone who displayed that. Okay. So I personally don't think the evidence for mental illness is super strong. Do I know what it was? No. But I feel fairly confident ruling out at least those two things. Okay, let's see. Her faith for sure was sincere. I mean, there was no doubt that her faith was sincere. Excuse me. All right. Some of the things that helped her, baby, God, he won't stay down off my desk. She was very aggressive in her tactics. She actually, very early artillery. She encouraged them to use that. And she really believed in frontal assaults. The French armies will have to start accepting that the knighthood isn't going to save them. And she helps with that, obviously, for all the obvious reasons. But she helps encourage intelligent use of men-at-arms and archery and things of that nature. So and just the fact that she was able to rally the French to some strong victories does an amazing world of good for the French morale. I mean, French morale was in the toilet. For about 50 years, French morale was in the toilet. they will begin to rally. They will begin to push the English back out. And eventually they will push them out quite a bit, although the English will implode a little bit. That doesn't hurt. But just like we see in England, you have a long war between these two groups, especially when it spans multiple generations. You are absolutely going to have this development of a sense of nationality. A couple of you have had my American, and I talk about nationalism when I get to, like, causes of World War I. This is basically a proto-nationalism. We are the same. We share the same language and the same culture and the same, religion. We are the same. We are different from these other people. And so you're really going, this is like the beginning of modern countries in a please don't claw my head, in a like a prototype prototype format. Okay. So by 1453, which is like 20 years after the last map I showed, ow, sorry, this is the problem at home with the cat. So English holdings, yeah, right up there. See that little dot, Calais, right up there at the tip of Flanders? That will be, by 1453, all that is left of English holdings in France. That's it. The Burgundians will hold this kind of weirdly scattered area, and eventually they will merge with, after 1453, they will merge with France itself. Anjou here will become much more mainstream. And this area down here we're going to look at. That was very separate, and it's going to also become really a part of mainstream or mainland or main royal holding, however you want to look at it, of France. So do I have more? Yeah, okay. All right. So as I've been talking about all the way through this, okay, feudalism is really going to begin to die a death during this war, and this war accelerated a process that might have taken a lot longer. The idea of knights and the idea of these holdings was defense, not offense. So when you have these people saying, no, especially in England, you need to cross the channel and attack these other people. That's not defense. There's a big legal issue there, the way this was all laid out. Okay, yeah, you're my liege lord, but that's not defense. You'd already had the development, like I mentioned before, was of the 40 days. Like the max that you would have to serve is 40 days. And castles would literally lay in 40 days worth of supplies and not a day more, because it got to the point where they could count on the fact that the people besieging them would get up and leave. It became very legalistic and almost contract driven. Now, the ones in charge who want this war, it's not going to work anymore to say, well, I'll give you lands there when I win. It's just not going to work anymore. So you begin to get a couple issues here. One is buying one's way out of your feudal dues, where these underlords are saying, hey, here's the thing, I will pay you X amount of money, you will hire somebody else. Okay. And the other one, it doesn't matter which one is which. Okay. The other one was, now I lost my train of thought. One is buying your way out of your feudal dues. I don't know. I don't remember. It'll probably come to me. This one was the one that funded the use of mercenaries. And they really were the tiny seeds of national standing armies. Their use, however, in France made all of the devastation worse. I mentioned the other day, sometimes they're not getting paid fast enough, or maybe they're just greedy and they go out and, rape and plunder on their own because, I mean, yeah, you can tell them not to, but are you going to attack them and make them not do it? Or sometimes, if your own knights felt it distasteful to go on chevauchee, you could get mercenaries to do it. And then you're also going to have the issue of when there's no active fighting, which, as we can see, this is a series of wars. This is not one long war. When the actual fighting stops, do these people just pack up and go home? Or are they left running around, say, in France, causing trouble? Lots and lots and lots of problems that this is gonna cause. The other thing that we see with the toward the even once in the early beginning of the 100 Years' War, but certainly later, is early use of gunpowder. Now this artistry, it's probably the 1400s, isn't showing the like it may be later, because this is probably not the case. These were massive. Sometimes they had to be cast on site because once they were to keep them from exploding, to keep them containing the charge that's propellant. I mean, basically, it's like do I have pictures? No. Well, here, that'll show it. That's one of them. Okay, this thing is massive. This thing could not be put on wheels and wheeled more than about 30 or 40 feet. So often they had to be built on site if they're going to be big enough to last more than, I don't know, 4 shots. And sometimes they would be cast smaller, and they, to get a couple shots off, it would break and they would melt it down and try again. Okay, they didn't have the ability to create the heat required for high strength steel. That takes like 3,000 degrees Kelvin, or 3,000 degrees, which is a Kelvin. And they didn't really have a way to do that. So this steel isn't really strong enough to last super well. None of this is an exploding shot. This is just firing a ball that's just battering at the defenses, just battering at the walls. Okay. All right. And they called them a bombard because you're bombarding things with them. I mean, literally. And we're going to look at more of that. We are going to look at absolutely more of that. Now, this one is actually like a little rocket, and these were very experimental and very hard to control. They didn't really know what to do with gunpowder quite yet, so you have a lot of, hey, let's try this and see what happens. It usually did very little. Okay. But these could be pretty effective against some of these walls, depending on how they were built. Now I'll come back to more of that. So overall, all right, depending on what you're counting, some parts of the 100 Years' War started as early into the 1100s. Okay, so the sort of outcome you get is spreading this idea of nationalism, people united by language, region, and religion, not feudal loyalties. You will still see people being like, oh, you're from Flanders, the Duke of Flanders, you're one of those. Or you're Burgundian. And they actually would sometimes use the word race in this context. Like the Burgundians were a different race than the English. Their meaning of that word and our meaning of that word are very different, and it gets really confusing when non-historians are looking at some of these sources. But you're going to begin to get this idea of actual, like, as Englishmen, we are different from you Frenchmen. Like, in some real but intangible way. All right. It absolutely gutted the economies of both countries. Okay. Gutted. And it certainly didn't help with the insane number of people that these killed, on top of things like the plague and the famines that come out of the plague. Like, really? Okay. You're also, like I've been mentioning, it sowed the seeds of destruction for feudalism. Knights defeated by commoners. You have the rise of infantry over cavalry, buying one ways out of feudal dues, and the use of gunpowder. I mean, it really is it is the beginning of the end for feudalism, and thus for the Middle Ages. I mean, by the time you get into the mid 1400s, it's really the quote unquote early modern period. No one won this. There is no winner. Okay, not with that kind of destruction. There is literally no winner. Basically, the English eventually just quit fighting and went home. Yeah, they'll claim the French throne. They'll never sit on it. It really wasn't about that. That was the excuse. But they will have created so much chaos at home that they have to stay home and deal with it. They can't keep this stupid thing going. It's just not worth it. I mean, half of Flanders was destroyed, and Flanders was really the area they were fighting over because of trade. Well, they kind of did in trade. It will take a while for that to grow again. So, so the sort of official timeline here: outbreak of hostilities, 1330s, 1340s. You know, the different battles. Obviously, I didn't go into Poitiers. I don't go into a lot of this. 1377 is the death of Edward III. He was on the throne for 50 years, like longer than anyone except Elizabeth II. There's another one, but I can't remember who it is. I mean, one of the longest reigns ever. You get this 20-year truce, and then it breaks out again with Henry V. You get the Battle of Agincourt, the Treaty of Troyes, the French recovery, okay, under Joan, and then eventually the end of the war. So I mean, there's a lot more we could be doing. So before the Battle of Crusade, okay, this is just the war in maps. Suggests both why hit and run tactics worked early in the war and why the English were basically unable to defeat the French. You would have had to have an army of occupation forever. I mean, you would have. Because you couldn't supersede them. You couldn't come in and just eliminate every single member of the nobility the way the Normans did in England. There's too many people now. There are too many holdings. You can't just do that anymore. And so the English would have had to be willing to fund an army of occupation effectively indefinitely. So before Cressy, you know, the English held this and this stuff up here. And the French king was trying to seize some of this stuff up here. Burgundy was more officially part of France. It didn't want to be. You know, the Treaty of Paris had left this stuff, but it was really iffy under English. You know, 1360 after the Battle of Poitiers, you get this, you get some pretty, you know, they're really moving in. You get more stuff up here, you know, in the north. And then after Orleans, and we've looked at this one today, this map. And then you have, and then and then it's basically done. 1453, end of the war. There's just no way to hold it. So this is just kind of a nice one showing who did what on the English side. So Edward III is the blue, and it's purple, but you can barely tell is the Black Prince here. Henry IV is the black, and Joan of Arc is involved down here with this one with the red around it. So just to kind of get a sense of that. Okay, see no hands. Okay, now we're going back in time. This is another one of those where we move into a new topic and we go back in time a little bit. Okay, we're going back in time to about the 1200s. Do you see why I don't use timelines to teach? Because I can't. Okay, but this stuff, it's so confusing if you try to do it strictly chronologically. All right, so for context, this is a lot of what France, the sort of southern France, and moving down into what we would call Spain looked like. All right, so you have the sort of bright orange is the Kingdom of Aragon. That area has been recaptured and resettled by Christians under the King of Aragon. Up in here, we have this green county of Comminges, county of Gévaudan. Gévaudan that's up here. That's actually, there's a fun might not be the right word, interesting story of a thing called the Beast of Gévaudan, which is basically like a horrible, maybe werewolf or possibly wildcat that got loose and started murdering people. Anyway, it's an interesting sort of side thing you can look at if you're but you have all these counties, okay, or in some cases duchies, but they're not. They're all just going by counties. This blue here is Toulouse. All right, the county of Toulouse. It's big. In the 1200s, Toulouse also held more territory than the King of France. you have Foix. Provence is this purple over here by Marseille and Nice. All right. And then a bunch of others that we don't have to care. We just kind of have to be aware of them. The hot pink here is the Viscounty, which is, or Viscounty, which is Béziers, Carcassonne, and Albi, the city of Carcassonne. These are places, Béziers and Albi, that are all going to be locations that are a big deal. And then you have Provence, which is the one you've probably heard of. The rest of these you may not have heard of, but the biggest and most and richest and most important is Toulouse. Just be aware. Now, in the year 1000, a little bit before that, and for some time after that, you're going to have the spread of a religious idea. It's coming up out of the East. This is a French map, where the names are in French. The Paulite, sometimes called Paulite, sometimes it's Paulician, sort of heresy that comes in. It sort of spreads and it goes through Constantinople and it works its way up into and around, sort of all the way up this part of France, and then back down with some coming across. There are bits and pieces of it in Italy, as you can see here. You will have a little bit of it up here in England, but not a ton. And this idea is, let's see where the presentation goes next. Oh, okay. So yeah, your Paulicians, your Manichaeans, this is again a French map, Bogomils and Cathars. They're not exactly the same, but they are very similar. And some of this stuff absolutely starts as early as the 3rd century. All right, it kind of moves sometimes in parallel with sort of official Christianity. All right, some of it is more like official Christianity than others. But one of the things that all of them are that Christianity isn't is a dualist, basically cosmology. All right, in Christianity, pretty much all versions of it, not really the Gnostics, and I don't think really the Coptics, but in all of the like European versions of it, let's say that, I'm safe there. God is all powerful, as we discussed the other day. All powerful, eternal, infinite, and all knowing. The devil is considerably less powerful. The devil was an angel who is subordinate to God, right? And then there was the fall and all the stuff that we didn't like. We don't think we've delved into a huge amount into the theology, but most of us are familiar with that. The devil and God are not of equal power. Okay. In a dualist way of looking at it, the evil and the good, or the dark and the light, are of equal power. All right. So even if you're using Christian terminology, that right there is a heresy. All right. Okay. Back to the Cathars. I think I'm not gonna do it giant because I can't see. Okay, so it just go. All right, so you have this dualistic world for the Cathars, and the Cathars basically, well, you can see it again here. All right, you've got a little bit in Spain. You have a lot in southern France. You have some all as far up as these parts of France. Okay, and they're existing basically side by side with quote unquote normal Christianity. Okay, remember how I said it was this idea of just get them basically converted and then we'll worry about the details later. Well, that does allow for some unusual ideas to come to light. So now it's later. Now we're into the 1200s and it's later, and the church who is trying to strengthen, it's trying to like assert itself, says, okay, now it's later. What the hell are you people thinking? Okay. So in the Cathar specifically, the Cathar or the Albigensian way of looking at the world, It was dualistic. The world of spirit was good, and the world of flesh, or the earthly world, was bad. Okay, that part works with Christianity. The world of spirit is good, and the world of flesh is bad. You want to be thinking about the spirit and your soul and eternity and all of those things, the city of God, not the city of man, etc. That part, fine. But then you get into this. The God of the New Testament was bad. Because the God of the New Testament is trying to make this world, the earthly world, better, and trying to make it where people should be. It's working against the true God. Okay, basically the God of the New Testament is the Cathar devil. That's their version of Satan. They use different terminology for that. They were much more, some of the names were very different. Okay, so, but because this was dealing with the world of the flesh and trying to convert people to the world of the flesh, and that's bad. Nobody wants the flesh. You want to die and be part of the spirit. Now, you're not going to get to do that. You're going to be reincarnated. Again, not a Christian idea. That's a very Eastern idea. You're going to be reincarnated until you get it right. And then once you get it right, you are basically freed of the ties of this world of flesh. Now, several things go with this. They believed that fornication, now the church agreed with them on this. I didn't actually talk about this part when I was talking about the church giving out basically all these rules. You can't fight on a Sunday, and you can't fight on a holy day, and you can't eat meat on these days, and all of these things that the church was doing starting in the 1200s. All right, they were very much against sex, not just against sex of clerics and people in the church. Ideally, nobody would have sex ever. According to the mainstream church in this era, ideally no one would ever have sex. Okay. But they realize that most people are not going to be the ideal people. So they're going to have sex. So it needs to be only in the service of procreation. They would give you that much. Then it's not actually sinful. You should just try not to do it more than you absolutely have to. Okay. Because again, pleasures of the flesh, pleasures of the world, that's not what you're supposed to be working on and thinking about and doing. All right. Now, the Cathars absolutely agreed with that, except the only do it for procreation part. You shouldn't even do it for procreation, because if you're procreating and making babies, you are pulling souls away from the world of spirit and trapping them down here on earth. That's bad. You shouldn't do that. So they were all supposed to be celibate. Now, were they all celibate? Of course not. But they were supposed to be. They were also very unusual for the Middle Ages, vegetarians. Killing and eating meat was bad. So they were vegetarians, particularly the strict ones. But as much as could be done without damaging health, they were vegetarians. Yes, Bryce.
How were they vegetarians back then when food wasn't really as abundant and well, not like genetically modified, but we like changed the food to be like more nutritious? It seems like it will be really hard to survive.
In some ways, their food is a lot more nutritious than ours. They're not eating preservatives, and they're not eating stuff where it's all been stripped out and then stuff's been put back in. Keep in mind, these are largely in areas that are warmer and have better harvests. I mean, the south of France is lovely. Even then, it was just beautiful and golden and warm and a great place to grow stuff. So that helped.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense with climate and all that stuff.
Well, and how I'd said, even in England, people mostly ate bread. The ordinary person mostly ate bread. So really, this restriction on being vegetarian mostly only applied in a way that might be considered restrictive. It mostly only applied to nobles.
Okay.
So yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And there were nobles who were Cathar. 100%. We're going to talk about it. Okay. So people who managed to actually be both chaste and vegetarian and really sort of live an ascetic life, like we would think of the monks as living this kind of life. Only this could be men, women. You didn't need any special ordination to be this thing. It was just done by the way you lived. We're called the perfecti. Okay, and they were considered sort of the leadership of the Cathar society. All of this, of course, is a heresy, but it was allowed to let lie for quite a while. All right, you get into the 1200s, and you're going to have a bunch of things happen that it's not going to get to. We'll come back to Massacre. All right, one of them is, as I mentioned, you have the Franciscans and you have the Dominicans, the founding of these guys who were supposed to be out in the world helping people to right belief. And the Franciscans did it by preaching, and the Dominicans did it by teaching. I mean, literally, one set was called the Preaching Friars and the other is called the Teaching Friars. And I mentioned the Dominicans tend to end up being lawyers, and they tend to end up being inquisitors. Okay, so this is supposed to be Dominic de Guzman. Please note he's got the saintly halo. No, he probably wasn't actually there, but certainly Dominicans did go down and debate these religious tenets, basically between some Dominicans and Cathar leaders. Because with the Cathars, they did use a lot of Christian terminology. Which kind of made it even, I mean, on one hand, it made it easier, and on another hand, it's like, wait, you mean what by this? No, that's not how it works. That's not what that word means. Okay, so you have this going on. Now, you have this other issue, and I'm going to go back here briefly, okay? This is an incredibly rich region. And this region is culturally almost a completely separate country than northern France. All right, they speak a very different, you could call it a version of French, but it's so different, it's almost not a version of French. There's actually several dialects of that in here. They have as much relationship down here to the Aragonese, lots of intermarriages. They're just very different. And this whole area is very, very wealthy. And it's not really under the control of the King of France. All right? It's not under control of the Capetians. And they don't like that. They really don't like that. So you have this revival of the church and this willingness to go out into the countryside, go out into these areas and try to change minds. And you have the French kings going, this is supposed to be our territory, and not one of you people will actually send any taxes on. You put these things together along with a crusading spirit, because we're well into the Crusades. All of this stuff begins around the time of the 12th or the 4th Crusade, the one to Constantinople. You put all of this together and you're going to have a really big problem. Okay. All right. So this is an image of Carcassonne, which is one of the few things on my bucket list to see. I want to see it. It is a picture of it. And it was ruled by the Counts of Toulouse, and it was just full of Cathars. And unlike other parts of Europe, Cathars and Catholic Christians lived pretty, down in places like this, side by side, fairly comfortably. The Cathars weren't really out to convert, and they didn't tend to pressure their neighbors into being like them, and their neighbors didn't tend to pressure them. They were also this whole area tended to be much more tolerant of Jews than any other part of Europe. Much, much more tolerant of Jews. Almost didn't make a distinction between them. Which is also going to upset some people in the church. And look at it. It's beautiful. It's rich. It is absolutely something that the French king wanted. months. So this guy, and this comes from, I think, a British television show, but I found all these cool pictures, so I used them because, like, the armor's right, the clothing and everything. So this guy, you don't have to know these details, but just so you understand. Okay, so you're going to have these people. Some of them are going to join the crusade because eventually with the help of the French king, the church is going to call a crusade to eliminate this heresy. Like they've been woken up now. They're really aware of this. They're like, this is not okay. So this guy, Raymond Rogers, is going to reconsider. He's going to try to offer a submission. It was rejected. Okay, because basically this crusade against the Cathars is as outwardly greedy as the one to Constantinople. 100%. Basically, the church made a blatant offer of, you can have their land. Look at where they were. That's a rich territory. This called all the creeps out of the woodwork, basically. So this was the guy in charge of Carcassonne, and he actually was going to surrender in the hopes that they would spare his territory. And they're like, yeah, by me, we want your land. So he managed to get back to Carcassonne. He stopped at the city of Béziers to warn the Jewish community there to flee because these people were coming. He didn't realize that when they get to Carcassonne, when they get to Béziers, I mean, only the Jews fled because he thought that those were the only people in danger. The Crusaders slaughtered everyone in this city in southern France. Everyone, Cathars, Catholics, any Jews that didn't flee. Okay, and then they're going to move on to Carcassonne, which was a big city. This guy will be taken captive during a truce, so a complete violation of the truce, and probably be murdered in his own prison. While later he was only 24. Carcassonne will surrender and be completely looted. I mean, it was insane what they did, and they didn't stop there. Okay, there will be. This is Arc. Raymond would have lived in a castle very much like this one. They will go to, the Cathars will be expelled. There will be other places where they're expelled. Literally, they're stripped naked and forced to walk out of the city with nothing. They will be asked to, convert, and they won't want to. And when they are not converted, when they won't convert, when they won't give up their heresy, they will be burned at the stake. And there are stories that some of them didn't wait for the soldiers to push them there. They went willingly because they were that convinced their religion was right. But basically what you have is the Crusaders are going to scour the countryside, rounding up and doing their best to eliminate Cathars. Okay, where am I? And the last of them are going to flee to this place, this place called Montségur. And Montségur looks like that from the valley below. It is very well fortified. It is a good place to hide. This is what it looks like from the air. It was a very difficult place. They will be holed up there effectively under siege and under attack for like a year, basically. Until finally the Crusaders are advanced to this area. So you have before Christmas at 1243, they took this foothold down here at this tower. You're going to have crossbow quarrels and you have stone balls, and they're basically going to make their way up this part of it to this. And once they get to this part, and again, it takes a while, they're going to be able to bombard. They're going to be able to bombard this. The one at the top and be able to take it. Some people were able to effectively rappel down the other side and escape. The Crusaders believed there to be a treasure, the Cathar treasury had been hidden up here, and they're not going to find any treasure. That is going to be part of what will lead to rumors that they have part of Solomon's treasure, like if the Templars didn't, the Cathars did. And this plays into Da Vinci Code, the Dan Brown thing with in his mind, or at least in his books, the Solomon's treasure is a person. It is a blood descendant of Jesus Christ. And that is what gets smuggled out of Montségur before the fall. And that's a whole thing. But here is the burning at the stake. Last thoughts on this. This is by many modern scholars, the numbers of deaths, and this doesn't get taught enough, are estimated to be a lot higher than conventionally understood. And there are people calling this a religious genocide, 100% calling this a religious genocide. And the worst one in Europe until you get to the Holocaust, because so many people, particularly percentage wise, were killed. And it was mostly greed. Greed with some religious fervor mixed in just to stir everything up. So there you go. There's the Albigensian Crusade.